My brother uninvited me from his Christmas dinner because I was not classy enough for his new elite friends. He actually called me a loser. Ignoring that I had been secretly funding his lifestyle for years, I did not argue. I just told him to pay his own bills. 3 days later, right in the middle of his glamorous holiday party, his fake empire crumbled in front of the exact people he desperately wanted to impress. My name is Zara Barnes. I sat perfectly still at my kitchen island, the stiff medical foam of a neck brace chafing uncomfortably against my jawline. I had been rear-ended at a traffic light exactly 4 days prior. The collision was not life-threatening, but it delivered just enough whiplash to make staring at dual computer monitors for 80 hours a week an exercise in sheer, blinding agony. As a forensic billing and compliance consultant, my job is to fix massive financial bleeding. For the past 7 days, I had been running on black coffee and adrenaline, pulling a mid-sized healthcare firm back from the brink of a 7-figure audit disaster. I was depleted. I was running on empty. More than anything, I was desperately craving the mindless, quiet comfort of my family on Christmas Eve. When my phone vibrated on the marble counter, the caller identification flashed the name of my older brother, Grant. I reached for it, adjusting the rigid collar around my neck, foolishly expecting a rare moment of sibling sympathy. Perhaps he was calling to ask if the pain medication was working, or to tell me to just show up in sweatpants and rest. "Hey, Grant," I answered, my voice raspy. "If you are calling for a medical update, I am surviving." He bypassed the pleasantries entirely. The background noise on his end was a chaotic symphony of clinking glass and shouted orders. "Zara, listen, we need to talk about tonight. We need to finalize the layout for the Christmas salon at Aurelian House." Not a Christmas dinner, a Christmas salon. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache blooming behind my eyes. "I know things are busy. Grant, look, I will not stay long. I just want to drop off the presents for Noah and Ivy. I can just sit in a corner chair out of the way. I really just need to be around family tonight." A heavy, incredibly irritated sigh echoed through the receiver. It was the sound a corporate executive makes when a subordinate asks an inconvenient question. "Zara, you are completely missing the point. This is not some cozy, low-budget family dinner where we wear ugly sweaters and eat dry turkey. Elise and I are hosting a curated room. We have venture capitalists arriving in less than an hour, angel investors, partners who write checks with 6 zeros. Every single detail tonight has to project absolute, unshakable success." I blinked, the dull ache in my neck suddenly flaring hot. "What exactly are you saying to me, Grant?" He did not hesitate. His voice was entirely devoid of warmth, stripped down to cold, calculated social climbing. "Look at yourself right now, Zara. You look utterly exhausted. You live in a medical brace. You dress like you're about to paint a living room. You work from a home office, and you have absolutely no idea how to network with high-net-worth individuals. You are going to show up tonight looking like a massive liability. This event is about power. It is about optics. It is a space designed exclusively for winners. Honestly, there is no place for losers here." The silence that followed stretched out, thick and suffocating. The word loser hung in the digital space between us, sharp as a scalpel. I felt a cold knot drop directly into the pit of my stomach. The humiliation was sudden and overwhelming, striking me precisely when my physical and mental defenses were completely shattered. I had spent my entire adult life building a quiet, bulletproof career, saving failing businesses. Yet here was my own brother, reducing my existence to a networking faux pas. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to remain perfectly level. "Are you seriously uninviting your own sister from Christmas because my physical appearance does not fit your investor aesthetic? You are actually kicking me out." "I am protecting my brand," Grant snapped, entirely unbothered by the gravity of what he was doing. "I have Tier 1 partners arriving soon. I cannot afford to have you sitting in a corner, looking miserable, and dragging down the energy of the entire room. Just stay home, rest your neck, send the kids their gifts in the mail next week." The line clicked dead. He hung up. I had no energy left for theatrics. I stood from the kitchen island, adjusted the foam collar at my neck, and moved to the stove. The throbbing physical pain at the base of my skull faded entirely into the background, overshadowed by a hollow, radiating ache in my chest. I was not crying. I was simply too tired to cry. What hurt so deeply was not the neck brace or the 80-hour work week. It was the sudden, glaring realization that to my own flesh and blood, I was nothing more than an aesthetic embarrassment. I was a stain on his meticulously crafted canvas of fake wealth. Seeking some kind of anchor, my thumb mechanically opened a social media application on my phone. The very first item at the top of my feed was a newly uploaded video from his wife, Elise. The camera panned grandly across the vaulted foyer of Aurelian House. Massive towers of imported white hydrangeas flanked a custom-carved ice sculpture. A private bartender in a crisp, spotless white jacket was meticulously polishing crystal champagne flutes. Elise then stepped into the frame, wearing a shimmering silk gown that likely cost more than a standard monthly mortgage payment. She held up a glass of vintage champagne, offering a triumphant, flawless smile to the camera. There was no mention of the holidays. There was no mention of family, peace, or gratitude. The caption flashing across the bottom of the video in bold, glittering typography was a direct, unmistakable strike aimed right at my quiet, uninvited existence. It read simply, "Winners only." I live in a quiet, unassuming townhouse in the outer suburbs. It is completely paid off. I hold no mortgage. I drive a reliable, 5-year-old sedan that gets excellent gas mileage. Professionally, I operate as a forensic billing and compliance consultant for North Key Forensic Advisory. In simple terms, I am the person a corporate board of directors calls in an absolute panic when millions of dollars vanish into thin air due to structural incompetence, severe embezzlement, or sheer executive stupidity. I dissect failing financial systems, locate the hidden arterial bleeding, and stitch the company back together. My annual income is well into the high 6 figures, but you would never guess it by looking at my wardrobe, which consists primarily of neutral tones, tailored slacks, and sensible shoes. I do not wear my net worth on my wrist or park it in my driveway. I prefer the absolute, unshakable safety of liquid assets, diversified index funds, and total anonymity. Grant, on the other hand, operates on the dangerous philosophy that if you project immense wealth, the wealth will miraculously manifest out of thin air. Growing up, he was always the golden boy. He was the charismatic athlete, the smooth talker, the guy who could charm a professor into changing a failing grade just by smiling. He fed entirely on the admiration of an audience. When our parents went through a brutal, humiliating bankruptcy nearly 15 years ago, that specific trauma fractured us in completely opposite directions. I reacted by building an impenetrable fortress of financial security. Grant, utterly terrified of looking poor or losing his social standing, doubled down on the illusion of grandeur. Over the past decade, he launched one flashy lifestyle business after another. There was a boutique fitness application, a high-end concierge service, and a luxury real estate staging firm. None of them possessed a solid, sustainable business plan, but all of them required him to wear custom-tailored Italian suits, lease expensive European sports cars, and rent premium office space just to look the part. He was constantly burning through capital, chasing the aesthetic of success rather than the actual substance of it. The inevitable breaking point arrived exactly 3 years and 4 months ago. It was a Tuesday evening in late November. A freezing rain was coming down in thick, relentless sheets. Grant showed up at my front door, completely drenched and entirely broken. His trademark charm had completely evaporated. He sat at my kitchen island, buried his face in his hands, and wept with the desperate panic of a man staring directly into the abyss. He confessed that he was mere weeks away from defaulting on the lease for Aurelian House, his latest and most ambitious venture into luxury event hosting. He swore to me, through heavy sobs, that he just needed a temporary bridge. He begged for a short-term safety net to keep Elise and the children from losing their home and their dignity while he restructured his mounting debts. I agreed to help. But because my entire career is built on analyzing financial risk, I knew my brother's destructive habits better than anyone. Handing Grant a massive lump sum of cash was the equivalent of pouring premium gasoline onto a raging fire. He would immediately convince himself he could use just a fraction of it to launch a new, aggressive marketing campaign to save the business. And he would lose every single penny. So, I established incredibly strict, non-negotiable boundaries. I would not transfer a single dollar into his personal bank account. Instead, I quietly integrated myself into the back end of his life as a silent, invisible benefactor. I set up automated, direct payments to his most critical, unglamorous vendors every single month. My private bank account absorbed the staggering, agonizing cost of Aurelian House's commercial liability insurance. If a wealthy guest happened to slip and fall on those imported marble floors Elise loved to show off, my money ensured my brother was not sued into absolute ruin. I personally funded the rolling contingency account for his event staff payroll, guaranteeing that the caterers, bartenders, and valet drivers were actually paid on time when his elite clients inevitably delayed paying their invoices. I covered the exorbitant monthly licensing fees for the proprietary event management software they required to operate the venue. Beyond the business, there were Noah and Ivy. They were the truest reason I opened my wallet and sacrificed my own peace of mind. I could not bear the heartbreaking thought of my young niece and nephew being pulled out of their familiar lives, losing their friends and their routines, all because of their father's reckless ego. So, I quietly took over 50% of their expensive private school tuition. I paid directly for Ivy's Advanced Ballet Academy and Noah's Regional Travel Baseball League fees. I did it because I love those children fiercely, and because I firmly believe that children should never, ever have to pay the crushing price for the financial sins of the adults who are supposed to protect them. In the beginning, there were tears of profound gratitude. Grant called me his savior. Elise sent me massive floral arrangements and overly emotional handwritten notes swearing they would pay me back within 6 months. But human memory is a remarkably fickle, self-serving thing, especially when fragile egos are involved. As the months slowly turned into years, that desperate temporary bridge seamlessly transformed into a permanent, invisible foundation. The frantic, tearful thank you calls stopped entirely. The deep appreciation warped and hardened into an unspoken, baseline expectation. My massive monthly financial hemorrhage became nothing more than a standard operating procedure in their minds, much worse than the creeping entitlement. However, was the condescension that followed. Because my money was entirely invisible to the outside world, my success was invisible to them. Because I did not live in a sprawling gated community or host lavish networking salons, they began to genuinely view me as a cautionary tale of mediocrity. During family gatherings over the past 2 years, Grant started making passive-aggressive, patronizing jokes about my boring, overly cautious lifestyle. Elise would corner me with a glass of wine and offer unsolicited, pitying advice on how to elevate my personal brand, eyeing my plain, functional clothing with poorly concealed distaste. They had completely masterfully insulated themselves from reality. They had actually managed to convince their own minds that their curated, high-end existence was entirely the result of their own brilliant entrepreneurial hustle. At the exact same time, they were actively mocking the very person whose silent, steady, exhausting labor was literally keeping their lights on and their children in school. They looked at my modest, quiet life and genuinely saw a loser, remaining willfully, arrogantly blind to the absolute fact that my silent financial sacrifices were the only reason they could afford to play their glamorous game of pretend. I did not throw a glass against the wall. I did not scream into the empty space of my house. Dramatic outbursts require an excess of energy, and I had absolutely none left to give. Instead, I stood up from the kitchen island, adjusting the foam collar around my neck, and walked slowly to the stove. I filled the kettle with filtered water and turned the burner to high. I selected a chamomile blend, placing the bag into a ceramic mug. The whistle of the boiling water was the only sound piercing the heavy silence. I poured the water, watching the clear liquid turn a deep, golden amber. My hands were perfectly steady. The chaotic, agonizing sting of rejection had vanished entirely, replaced by a sudden, glacial clarity. Carrying the mug to my home office, I sat down in my ergonomic chair. I woke up my primary workstation. The glow of the dual monitors washed over my face. I bypassed the urgent client emails I had been agonizing over for the past 7 days. Instead, I opened my personal financial dashboard and navigated to the master spreadsheet I simply titled Family Bridge. The spreadsheet was a meticulously color-coded map of my brother's survival. Column after column detailed the exact architecture of his manufactured success. I stared at the outgoing automated transfers scheduled for the end of the month. I looked at the thousands of dollars I bled quietly so he could pretend to be a titan of industry. Then, I thought about the phrase he had just used to describe me on the phone. I thought about the glittering social media post I had just watched from his wife. They were standing on a stage built entirely from my money, looking down at me and calling me a loser. Every imported hydrangea, every crystal flute, every condescending smirk was subsidized by my labor. If I allowed the next cycle of auto payments to clear in 3 days, I would no longer be a supportive sister. I would be an active, willing sponsor of my own humiliation. I would be writing a check to fund my own bullying. In my line of work, when an investment becomes structurally toxic and begins to cannibalize the host, you do not try to negotiate with it. You amputate it. You stop the bleeding. I did not seek emotional revenge. I did not plot to hack into his business accounts or sabotage his guest list. I simply chose to execute a perfectly legal, heavily strategic withdrawal of my voluntary backing. I would not touch a single asset that belonged to him. I would merely stop giving him mine. I navigated to the commercial insurance portal for Aurelian House. The premium was due on the 26th of December. I clicked on the payment profile, located my platinum credit card, and hit the delete button. The system prompted me with a warning that removing the payment method would result in a lapse of liability coverage within 48 hours. I clicked confirm. Next, I logged into the third-party payroll contingency account. I had parked $15,000 there as a rolling guarantee, so his event staff would not walk out when his cash flow inevitably bottlenecked. I initiated a full transfer of the remaining balance back to my private checking account. I closed the contingency module completely. I moved to the vendor platform that managed his event software, the digital backbone that allowed him to organize his high-end guest lists and process his bespoke invoices. The monthly licensing fee of $900 was scheduled to pull from my account tomorrow morning. I revoked the authorization with a single click. Finally, I tackled the personal expenses. I canceled the recurring transfers that went directly to his checking account for the children's extracurricular activities. I knew exactly what would happen if I left those active. If I sent the money directly to him, he would immediately divert it to cover the massive hole I had just created in his event budget. I refused to let him use his children's tuition as a slush fund to buy expensive appetizers for venture capitalists. I pushed back from the desk and looked across the room. 2 boxes wrapped in simple brown paper and tied with plain twine sat on the console table. They contained the robotics kit for Noah and the professional illustration markers for Ivy. I took a slow sip of my tea. I would still deliver those gifts. I was severing the financial umbilical cord to 2 incredibly entitled adults. I absolutely refused to punish the children for the breathtaking arrogance of their parents. I picked up my phone. The screen was still warm in my palm. I opened the messaging thread with Grant. He had not sent a follow-up text. He had not apologized. He was likely too busy tasting imported wines and adjusting the lighting for his investors. I did not type out a long, emotional paragraph explaining my feelings. I did not demand an apology. I did not tell him what I had just done on my computer. I typed exactly 6 words. Then pay your own bills. I hit send. I watched the small digital indicator at the bottom of the screen turn to delivered, and a few seconds later, it shifted to read. I waited for the inevitable incoming call, expecting a sudden burst of defensive rage, but nothing happened. The screen remained entirely dark. He was probably rolling his eyes. shoving the phone into the pocket of his tailored suit, firmly believing that this was just a pathetic, temporary tantrum from a bitter, unsophisticated sister. He undoubtedly assumed I would sulk through the holiday weekend and the automatic payments would quietly process on Monday morning. Exactly as they had for the past 39 months, he had absolutely no idea that the load-bearing pillars of his empire had just been entirely removed. The profound chill in my chest settled into something solid, heavy, and permanent. The aggrieved, heartbroken sister who had answered the phone 20 minutes ago was completely gone. I set the phone face down on the desk. I was no longer crying. I was not even sad. I closed my banking applications and opened a fresh, blank word processing document. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I was shifting entirely from family mode into forensic audit mode. I began to type, meticulously documenting every single date, every dollar amount, and every transaction I had ever executed on his behalf. I started taking notes. I shifted into a cognitive space that my colleagues at the firm refer to as the audit vacuum. It is a state of hyper-focused detachment where human emotion is entirely stripped away, leaving nothing but raw data, chronological timelines, and undeniable financial footprints. I opened a new, heavily encrypted spreadsheet on my secondary monitor. I titled the document The Master Ledger. I began the arduous process of pulling bank statements dating back exactly 3 years and 4 months. I created 4 distinct color-coded columns to categorize the hemorrhage of my own wealth. The first column was designated for family stability, which included the private school tuition, the ballet academy fees, and the travel baseball expenses. The second column was labeled venue operations, housing the commercial insurance premiums and the event software licenses. The third was for critical emergencies, tracking the random, frantic wire transfers I had executed when a caterer threatened to walk out or a florist demanded a massive deposit. The final column was simply named Bridge Coverage, detailing the rolling payroll guarantees and the silent gap funding that kept my brother out of bankruptcy court. To ensure the ledger was completely airtight, I synchronized my financial data with my personal email archives and my text message history. It was a fascinating, deeply pathetic archaeological dig through my brother's shifting psychology. The early records from 3 years ago were overflowing with absolute desperation. I found dozens of messages from Grant begging for help, full of phrases promising that he would pay me back on the first of the month, or swearing that this was the absolute last time he would ever ask. I found heavily formatted emails from Elise with urgent invoices attached, her messages dripping with saccharine gratitude, begging me to just cover this one specific vendor because their cash flow was temporarily tied up in a new marketing campaign. As I scrolled closer to the present day, the frantic gratitude vanished completely, replaced by brief, entitled demands. The transition from savior to silent servant was documented right there in the digital ink. I highlighted the final cell in the spreadsheet and applied the auto-sum function. The algorithm calculated the total amount of money I had silently injected into their artificial empire over the past 40 months. The final number flashed on the screen. It was $284,750. I sat back in my chair, the breath temporarily knocked out of my lungs. When you pay for things in staggered, incremental monthly bursts, you lose sight of the macroeconomic picture. I had not just been floating a few bills. I had been single-handedly operating a massive, long-term corporate bailout program for a business that produced absolutely nothing but vanity. I took a slow breath, steadying my pulse, and prepared to export the ledger. But as I was cross-referencing a particularly vague invoice from a luxury lighting vendor, I needed to check a shared cloud drive Grant had invited me to 2 years prior when he first set up the venue. I had not looked at the folder in months. I clicked through the directories, searching for the vendor contract, but my eyes caught a subfolder titled Series A Funding Materials. My professional instincts flared immediately. Grant was not running a tech startup. He was running a boutique event space. He had no business drafting Series A funding documents. I opened the folder. Inside was a sleek, professionally designed 60-page presentation deck intended for private equity firms and angel investors. I opened the document and began to scroll. It was filled with the usual corporate buzzwords, wildly inflated revenue projections, and photographs of Elise looking important in expensive venues. But when I reached page 42, my blood ran absolutely cold. The page was titled Family Backing Network and Strategic Advisory. Right there, in crisp, bold typography, was my full legal name, followed by my exact corporate title, Senior Forensic Compliance Consultant at North Key Forensic Advisory. Underneath my name was a highly exaggerated paragraph detailing my expertise in corporate risk management and financial structuring. Grant and Elise had been actively using my pristine professional reputation to legitimize their chaotic, debt-ridden business to high-net-worth investors. They were parading my credentials to secure massive loans, assuring banks that a top-tier forensic accountant was advising their financial strategy. Yet, in their social circles, they painted me as a pathetic, dependent relative who worked a boring desk job and lacked the sophistication to attend their glamorous parties. The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost artistic. I dug deeper into the cloud folder, my heart hammering a slow, dangerous rhythm against my ribs. If they were brazen enough to use my resume in a pitch deck, I needed to know what else they had fabricated. I found a subfolder labeled Banking Correspondence. Inside was a digital copy of a comfort letter addressed to the commercial lending division of a major regional bank. A comfort letter is a formal document often used in corporate finance. It is meant to provide a bank with a level of assurance that a backer or parent company will support a borrower. I read the text of the letter. It explicitly stated that I, acting as a strategic financial partner, was fully aware of the loan application and was providing ongoing, structured capital support to Aurelian House. At the bottom of the page was my signature. I leaned closer to the monitor, scrutinizing the blue ink. It was not a forgery drawn by hand. It was a digital scan, perfectly cropped and pasted onto the document. I recognized the specific loop of the letters. It was lifted directly from a joint tax document I had signed for our parents' estate settlement over 5 years ago. I had never seen this comfort letter. I had never authorized this document. I had never agreed to legally back a commercial loan for his business. This was no longer a family dispute about a Christmas party. This was not about arrogance or wounded feelings. By lifting my signature and attaching it to a formal banking document to secure capital, my brother had crossed a very clear, very dangerous legal threshold. He had committed financial misrepresentation and potentially wire fraud. The anger I had felt earlier completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, surgical precision. I did not pick up the phone to scream at him. I did not send a threatening text message. In my profession, you do not warn the target that you are auditing them. You secure the perimeter. I opened a screen-capturing application. I took high-resolution snapshots of the documents, ensuring that the metadata, the creation dates, the author tags, and the modification histories were clearly visible. I downloaded the entire directory from the cloud drive, saving the raw files onto an external, encrypted hard drive. I created a master timeline, linking every false document to the specific dates he had demanded money from me. I packed everything into a secure zip file. Then, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Tessa Rowe. Tessa and I had suffered through our undergraduate finance and pre-law programs together. She was now a highly ruthless, incredibly brilliant civil and commercial litigator downtown. I checked the clock. It was nearly 11 at night. But Tessa operated on the same grueling corporate schedule I did. I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Please tell me you are calling to drink wine, Zara, because if you are calling about the maritime logistics case, I will hang up on you." "No wine," I said, my voice perfectly flat and devoid of emotion. "And no maritime law. I need to hire you, officially." Her tone shifted instantly, the exhaustion vanishing, replaced by sharp professional focus. "What happened?" "My brother just kicked me out of his Christmas event because I am a loser who ruins his aesthetic," I explained calmly. So I decided to stop paying for his commercial insurance and his payroll. While I was closing the accounts, I found a forged commercial banking comfort letter with my scanned signature attached to a massive investor pitch deck. There was a brief silence on the line. I could hear the faint sound of Tessa sitting up in her chair. "I have the metadata," I continued. "I have the original files. I have 3 years of financial tracking proving I have been bridging his operational costs while he uses my corporate credentials to defraud investors. I need to build a defensive wall, and I need to do it before his house of cards collapses and the banks come looking for his supposed silent partner." "Send me the encrypted file right now," Tessa said, her voice dropping into a deadly serious register. "Do not speak to him. Do not answer his calls. Be at my office at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. We are going to bury him in paperwork." The fallout arrived exactly 48 hours before the event, hitting my phone like a localized seismic event. It began at precisely 9 o'clock in the morning. My screen lit up with Grant's name. I let it ring out. 2 minutes later, he called again, then again, by the 5th consecutive missed call. I knew the automated billing systems had officially triggered their failure protocols. I picked up on the 6th ring, placing the phone on speaker and setting it on my desk next to my coffee mug. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" Grant did not say hello. He did not ask about my neck brace. His voice was a frantic, high-pitched bark, echoing slightly as if he was pacing through the cavernous halls of Aurelian House. "I just got a critical alert from the event management platform. They locked my entire administrative access because the payment method bounced, and the commercial insurance broker just emailed me a 48-hour notice of cancellation." "Did you cancel your cards? Did you get hacked?" "I did not get hacked, Grant," I replied, my voice completely level. "I simply removed my financial information from your accounts." There was a sharp intake of breath on his end, followed immediately by the predictable pivot to aggressive gaslighting. He tried to seamlessly transform a massive financial liability into a petty emotional dispute. "Are you out of your mind? You are seriously doing this right now? You are going to sabotage my most important networking event of the entire year just because you are throwing a childish tantrum over a dinner invitation? Zara, this is pathetic. You are overreacting to a minor aesthetic disagreement." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I am not throwing a tantrum. I am actually agreeing with your professional assessment. You stated very clearly that your event is a curated room and there is no place for losers." It suddenly occurred to me that if I am a loser, my money must be incredibly embarrassing to you. I would hate to ruin your perfect image by quietly subsidizing it. "You are jeopardizing my business over hurt feelings," he shouted, his voice cracking with genuine panic. "Put the card back on file right now. I have Tier 1 investors walking through these doors in 2 days, and if the vendor system is locked, I cannot process the catering invoices. If the insurance lapses, the venue management will literally shut down the bar. You cannot do this to me." "I am not doing anything to you," I corrected him calmly. "I am simply no longer doing things for you. There is a very distinct difference. Then pay your own bills. Grant." I ended the call. He immediately tried to ring back, but I engaged the temporary silencing feature on his contact profile. Exactly 30 minutes later, the second wave of the assault began. Elise called. I answered, curious to see which tactics she would deploy. She opted for the role of the exhausted, reasonable peacemaker dealing with an irrational subordinate. "Zara, darling, let us all just take a deep breath and be reasonable adults about this," Elise cooed, though the tight, strained edge in her voice betrayed her absolute terror. "Grant is incredibly stressed, and he chose his words poorly the other night. We are willing to make a concession. If you log back into the portal and resolve this little billing glitch today, I can personally guarantee that we will find a way to squeeze a chair in for you at the far end of the dining room. You can come for an hour." I actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that seemed to startle her into silence. The insult was so profoundly, spectacularly arrogant. They were staring down the barrel of total operational failure, and they genuinely believed my entire rebellion was just a desperate plea to sit in their presence. They thought they could bribe me with a folding chair at my own extortionately expensive party. Elise, you still do not understand, I said softly. I do not want a seat at your table. I am taking the table back. You are being incredibly cruel to your own family, Elise snapped, the polite mask entirely disintegrating. Do you have any idea how humiliating it will be if the vendors walk out while Dean Holloway and the venture capital partners are standing in my foyer? This is not about you. This is about our reputation. Your reputation is your responsibility, I replied. Good luck with the investors. I hung up. By early afternoon, the pressure wave expanded to the extended family network. In psychological terms, these are known as the flying monkeys, the secondary layer of enablers that a manipulator sends out to apply communal guilt. Aunt Sarah called first, followed closely by my older cousin Mark. Grant had clearly spent the morning spinning a magnificent, tragic narrative. According to the family grapevine, I had maliciously hacked his business accounts and canceled his vendors out of sheer, spiteful jealousy right before the holidays. Aunt Sarah practically vibrated with righteous indignation through the receiver. I simply cannot believe you would be so vindictive. Zara, to cut off your own brother's livelihood right before Christmas just because you felt left out? It is incredibly selfish. You are ruining the holidays for everyone. I kept my tone even and skipped the defense entirely. I asked one question. Aunt Sarah, did Grant happen to mention to you whose credit card has been paying for that business for the past 3 years? The line went completely dead silent. Did he tell you who paid his commercial insurance last month? I pressed, my tone conversational. Did he mention who covers the payroll safety net so his staff does not quit? Because it seems to me that if he is the successful entrepreneur he claims to be, my absence should not affect his operations at all, Aunt Sarah sputtered, stammering out a confused half-sentence before I quietly suggested she ask Grant to show her his own bank statements. I ended the call. I repeated the exact same process with Cousin Mark. The strategy was brutally effective. I did not need to scream my truth. I only needed to hand them a flashlight and point them toward Grant's massive, gaping financial holes. As the sun began to set, casting long, cold shadows across my office floor, the adrenaline of the day finally began to recede. The silence in my house felt different now. It was no longer the silence of a victim. It was the silence of a fortified bunker. Then, my phone buzzed with a single text message. It was not from Grant, Elise, or an outraged relative. I picked it up and read the notification on the lock screen. It was from Noah. Aunt Zara, are you still coming with the coding game? Dad is yelling a lot and Mom is crying in the bathroom. I hope your neck feels better. I stared at the glowing words, my chest tightening with a sudden, fierce ache amidst all the corporate threats, the canceled insurance policies, and the desperate social climbing. There was a 10-year-old boy sitting in a chaotic house, waiting for his aunt to bring him a science project. Grant and Elise were tearing their own world apart to protect an illusion, but I absolutely refused to let that collateral damage strike the children. My resolve hardened into solid steel. I would not let Noah and Ivy become casualties of this war. I quickly typed a reassuring reply, promising him that I would absolutely see him for the holidays. No matter what the adults were doing, the battle lines were officially drawn, and I knew exactly who I was protecting. I arrived at Tessa Rowe's office exactly at 8 o'clock in the morning, located on the 14th floor of a brutalist concrete building downtown. Her workspace was entirely devoid of the usual mahogany and leather law firm cliches. It was stark, hyper-modern, and intensely functional, which perfectly mirrored Tessa herself. We had survived our undergraduate finance programs by relying on ruthless logic, and I needed that exact mindset now. We spread my printed spreadsheets across her frosted glass conference table. Tessa handed me a red pen. She instructed me to perform immediate triage on the data. We needed to separate the bleeding heart from the binding contracts. I spent the next 2 hours explicitly defining the legal nature of every single transaction. The private school tuition, the ballet lessons, the robotics camps for the children were legally classified as voluntary gifts. I had paid them out of love, with absolutely zero expectation of reimbursement, and we set those aside. But the commercial event expenses were entirely different. I pointed to the thousands of dollars in vendor payments, the software licenses, and the insurance premiums, simultaneously pulling up the corresponding text messages where my brother explicitly promised to pay me back by the first of the month. From this exact second forward, "You are a ghost on the telephone," Tessa commanded, tapping the glass table with her pen. "You do not answer his calls. You do not answer his wife's calls. If they corner you in person, you walk away. You communicate exclusively through written text or email. We need them to keep putting their desperation and their subtle admissions of debt into writing. We are building a paper trail, not a relationship." I nodded, reaching into my leather briefcase. I pulled out the printed copy of the investor pitch deck and the forged comfort letter I had extracted from his shared cloud drive. I slid the documents across the table. I watched Tessa's eyes scan the pages. Her posture stiffened immediately as she absorbed the gravity of the text. "Zara," she said, her voice dropping a full octave into a deadly serious register. "Being an ungrateful sibling is not a crime. This, however, is a catastrophic legal liability. He is using your specific corporate title and your forged signature to secure commercial funding under false pretenses. This transcends family drama. This is textbook financial misrepresentation. If he actually hands this to a venture capital firm, you could be dragged into a massive fraud investigation." The reality of her words settled over me like a heavy winter coat. We spent the next 3 hours drafting a highly targeted, mercilessly precise legal package. It consisted of 3 distinct documents. First, a formal cease and desist order, permanently enjoining them from utilizing my name, my likeness, or my professional credentials in any business capacity. Second, a reservation of rights letter, legally preserving my option to sue for the recovery of the business-related debts. Third, a formal notice of revocation, explicitly stating that all implicit or explicit financial backing was immediately and permanently terminated, while Tessa's paralegal finalized the drafts. I handled the final institutional cleanup. I formally removed myself as a billing contact, revoked any remaining payment authorizations, and documented each confirmation for the file. By 7 o'clock that evening, I was back home, eating a simple dinner at the kitchen island. The chaotic noise of the past few days had settled into a tense, vibrating silence. Then, my phone chimed with a high-priority push notification from my banking application. It was a severe fraud alert. Someone had just attempted to process a charge of $12,500 for an imported floral and event design company. They had tried to run the transaction on a virtual credit card number I had generated over 1 year ago to pay a one-time catering deposit for Aurelian House. I had forgotten to deactivate that specific virtual token. Grant had kept the number. He had written it down, saved it, and tried to use it without my permission to save his precious holiday party aesthetics. I immediately clicked the button on my screen to decline the charge and permanently lock the card. I called the bank's 24-hour fraud department and officially reported the attempted unauthorized transaction, ensuring a hard block was placed on any merchant associated with his venue. Any lingering, microscopic shred of familial guilt I might have harbored evaporated into thin air. He was not just an arrogant brother throwing a tantrum over an aesthetic disagreement. He was actively trying to steal my money behind my back to maintain his illusion of wealth. I sent a secure, encrypted message to Tessa detailing the attempted fraudulent charge. She replied within 2 minutes. Our strategy was completely solidified. We would not send the legal package immediately. We would not give him the luxury of time to spin a new web of lies or scramble for alternative funding before his highly publicized event. We would hold the documents until the exact moment they would inflict the maximum institutional impact. We were not trying to create a melodramatic scene or punish him emotionally. We were going to cleanly, clinically, and legally dismantle his ability to ever abuse my identity again. The digital unraveling of Aurelian House began exactly 24 hours before the grand event, playing out entirely on social media. From the absolute quiet of my home office, I watched the cracks form in real time. In the world of performative wealth, silence is usually a sign of genuine security, while excessive noise is a blaring siren of impending disaster. Elise was producing a deafening amount of noise. She uploaded over a dozen short video clips to her profile in the span of 2 hours. It was a frantic, transparent attempt to drown out her mounting financial terror with aggressive aesthetics. I watched a tightly cropped video of a florist installing a massive, sprawling archway of imported white orchids. The caption floating across the screen read that they were accepting nothing but absolute perfection for their inner circle. A few minutes later, another post appeared, showcasing custom monogrammed linen napkins and sterling silver chargers. She was treating her profile like a psychological life raft, desperately trying to convince her followers, and perhaps herself, that the ship was not rapidly taking on water. The illusion, however, was strictly confined to the internet. In the real world, the social foundation was already beginning to fracture. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone vibrated with a message from a woman named Caroline. Caroline was the mother of a girl who danced in the same advanced ballet academy as my niece, Ivy, in upper-middle-class suburban circles. Gossip moves faster than a wire transfer, especially when a platinum credit card is suddenly declined at a prestigious administrative office. Caroline phrased her inquiry with the delicate, plausible deniability of a concerned friend. She mentioned that she had heard Grant and Elise were restructuring some of their educational and extracurricular portfolios, and she just wanted to ensure everything was fine with the family. It was a polite, socially acceptable way of asking if my brother was going broke. I did not take the bait. I did not launch into a bitter tirade about the canceled vendor accounts or the fraudulent documents. In my profession, you never hand ammunition to a bystander. You maintain an impenetrable, neutral perimeter. I drafted a meticulously polite reply, thanking her for her concern and stating simply that I was no longer managing the administrative payments for my brother's household, so I could not speak to their current accounting structure. It was a perfectly clean, factually accurate statement that confirmed the rumors without me ever having to say a single negative word. Meanwhile, the operational pressure on Grant was reaching a boiling point. Through my lingering connections in the local corporate event industry, I knew exactly how vendors reacted when an automated payment system flagged a primary account for insufficient funds or a locked card. The grace periods vanished instantly. Trust was replaced by rigid contractual enforcement. I could see the panic manifesting in Grant's subsequent posts. He uploaded a picture of a premium seafood tasting platter, tagging a highly exclusive catering company. He was trying to project power. But to my trained eye, the narrative was painfully obvious. That specific caterer was notorious for demanding 100% of their fee in cash. Up front, the moment a client's payment history showed a single red flag, Grant was bleeding out his absolute last dollar of liquid capital just to keep the food on the table, sacrificing his actual survival for the appearance of it. Then, the final, most dangerous piece of the puzzle fell perfectly into place. I received an unexpected email from a former colleague, a senior auditor I had worked with on a massive corporate merger 3 years ago. He was reaching out to see if I was attending the holiday salon at Aurelian House, casually mentioning that his superior, Dean Holloway, was on the guest list. I stared at the name on my monitor, my breath catching in my throat. Dean Holloway was not just a wealthy socialite. He was the regional director of risk management for Crown Meridian Bank. He was the exact executive responsible for approving high-yield commercial loans and large-scale capital injections for boutique businesses in our district. The entire picture snapped together with terrifying clarity. This Christmas Eve party was never about celebrating the holidays. It was not even about shallow social climbing. It was a live, high-stakes due diligence test. Grant was using the luxurious setting, the expensive food, and the carefully curated guest list to physically demonstrate his fake success to the exact man who held the keys to his next massive bailout loan. And floating somewhere in Dean Holloway's preliminary underwriting file was a forged comfort letter bearing my stolen signature, falsely guaranteeing that my pristine financial reputation was backing this entire hollow production. I immediately called Tessa. I briefed her on Dean Holloway's attendance and the true nature of the event. "The legal package is completely finalized and ready for deployment," Tessa confirmed, her voice crisp and authoritative over the line. "But listen to me very carefully. Zara, you are holding a highly explosive legal hand grenade. You do not throw it unless he forces your hand. You cannot barge into that venue and cause a scene. If you trespass, you shift the liability onto yourself. Keep your hands entirely clean. You are dealing with federal financial regulations now, not a sibling rivalry." I assured her I understood the rules of engagement perfectly. I had absolutely no intention of crashing a party I was explicitly uninvited from. I walked over to the console table in my hallway and looked at the 2 gifts wrapped in simple brown paper: the robotics kit for Noah, the illustration markers for Ivy. I made my final decision. I would drive to Aurelian House tomorrow evening. I would walk up to the front door, hand the gifts to the valet or whoever answered, and I would walk away. I would not cross the threshold unless I was explicitly invited inside. I would remain the calm, rational professional I had spent my entire adult life becoming. However, a cold, unyielding resolve settled deep into my bones. I would not start a fire in his venue, but if my brother dared to drag my name through the mud in front of his guests, or if he attempted to leverage my identity to defraud a bank director while I was standing right there, I would not remain silent. I would not protect his illusion for one more second. I would let the truth burn the entire facade to the ground. Christmas Eve arrived with a biting chill. The sky was the color of bruised iron. I stood at my kitchen island, finishing the wrapping on the 2 boxes. I used simple brown craft paper, tied tightly with plain cotton twine. Inside were the robotics kit and the professional illustration markers. I slipped into my heavy charcoal wool coat. It was flawlessly tailored and incredibly warm, but entirely devoid of designer logos or flashy hardware. It was just me. I felt no desperate urge to transform myself into a glittering socialite just to prove a point to a room full of strangers. Before picking up my car keys, I composed a quick, cheerful text message to Elise's phone, specifically asking her to pass it along to Noah and Ivy. I invited both of them to a special brunch, just the 3 of us, on the 26th of December at their favorite pancake house. I needed those children to understand that my love for them was a permanent fixture, completely insulated from the toxic warfare of the adults around them. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A secure message from Tessa appeared on the screen. She confirmed that the digital and physical legal packages were primed and loaded. She was sitting by her phone, waiting. She instructed me to give her the green light the exact second my brother tried to leverage my name with the bank tonight. I replied with a simple confirmation. The safety net was officially stripped away. Now I was carrying the hammer. The drive to the Blackthorn Ridge neighborhood took exactly 45 minutes. The streets grew wider and the properties more imposing as I approached Aurelian House. Even from a block away, the sheer scale of the production was staggering. A long, glittering line of luxury sedans and imported sports cars snaked up the sweeping driveway. 3 valet attendants in crisp uniforms were sprinting back and forth under the grand entrance. Through the massive, arched glass windows, the venue was bathed in a rich, buttery golden light. Faint strains of a live string quartet drifted out into the freezing night air. It was a breathtaking, flawless stage meticulously constructed for Grant's ultimate illusion of victory. I parked my sensible sedan down the street, well out of the way of the valet line. I walked up the manicured stone pathway, the 2 brown paper packages tucked firmly under my arm. My plan was brilliantly simple. I would place the gifts on the edge of the sprawling marble porch, send Grant a text message telling him they were outside, and walk back to my car in absolute silence. I did not want a confrontation. I reached the top step, before I could even bend down to place the boxes on the cold stone. The heavy oak front door swung open. Grant stood there, holding a crystal glass of bourbon. His face was flushed, whether from the alcohol or the intense operational stress. I could not tell. The moment his eyes locked onto me, all the color instantly drained from his cheeks. Absolute, Unadulterated panic flashed across his features. He did not say hello. He did not wish me a Merry Christmas. He instinctively grabbed the heavy brass handle and pulled the door inward, narrowing the gap to a mere sliver, desperately trying to block the sightline from the lavish foyer to the porch. He was treating me like a stray dog that had wandered onto a pristine golf course. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a frantic, harsh whisper. "I told you, you are not invited. You need to leave right now before someone sees you." I held my ground and lifted the 2 brown packages. "I'm not here to crash your curated room. Grant, I am dropping off the presents for Noah and Ivy. You can take them, and I will walk back to my car. I have zero interest in crossing your threshold." He reached his hand through the narrow crack in the door to snatch the boxes away from me. But the universe has a remarkable sense of timing. At that exact second, a tall, distinguished man in a bespoke navy suit stepped directly into the foyer behind Grant. I recognized him instantly. It was Dean Holloway, the Regional Director of Risk Management for Crown Meridian Bank. Dean was looking past my brother's shoulder, his eyes scanning the porch. His gaze landed squarely on my face. A look of genuine, pleasant surprise lit up his expression. "Zara Barnes?" Dean's booming, authoritative voice echoed through the narrow opening of the door, completely slicing through Grant's frantic whispering. "Is that you standing out there in the freezing cold?" Grant froze entirely. He was caught in an impossible, agonizing trap of his own making. He could not slam the door in the face of the exact executive whose approval he desperately needed to avoid total financial ruin. He could not tell Dean Holloway, the man who had a forged comfort letter bearing my name sitting in his underwriting file, that I was actually an unwanted loser being barred from the premises. The silence stretched for a terrifying second. Grant's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. With a look of absolute defeated terror, he slowly pulled the heavy oak door wide open. "Zara was just arriving," Grant lied smoothly, though his voice trembled slightly. He plastered a sickly, desperate smile onto his face and gestured toward the grand foyer. "Come inside for a minute. Zara, it is freezing out there. Come in and say hello to everyone." He thought he was saving his image by inviting me in for a brief, polite moment. He had absolutely no idea that by opening that door, he had just invited the auditor directly into the crime scene. I adjusted the lapels of my dark wool coat, stepped over the threshold, and walked into the light. The foyer of Aurelian House was an overwhelming assault of manufactured luxury. The air was thick with the heavy scent of imported white orchids and expensive amber perfume. A live string quartet played softly in the corner of the grand hall, their bows moving in synchronized perfection. Waiters in immaculate white jackets glided silently across the heated marble floors, carrying silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and beluga caviar. I stood just inside the heavy oak doors, the freezing night air still clinging to my plain charcoal coat, in a sea of shimmering sequined gowns, velvet dinner jackets, and diamond accents. I was a dark, functional monolith. I could practically feel the collective gaze of the room sliding over me, assessing my lack of designer labels and immediately categorizing me as a profound anomaly. Elise materialized from the glittering crowd almost instantly. Her smile was stretched so tightly across her face it looked physically painful. She glided toward me, projecting the flawless image of a gracious hostess. But her eyes were entirely feral. She chimed a greeting, her voice a brittle melody meant strictly for the audience around us. Before I could even reply, her gaze dropped deliberately to the floor. She stared at my sensible, scuff-free leather boots as if I had just tracked wet mud onto an ancient, priceless tapestry. It was a microscopic, deeply calculated gesture designed to remind me that I was an aesthetic failure in her curated room. But before Elise could attempt to usher me quietly back out into the cold, Dean Holloway stepped smoothly around her. The regional director of risk management was a tall, imposing man who commanded attention without ever raising his voice. He extended a firm, warm hand toward me, entirely ignoring Elise and her strained smile. "Zara Barnes," Dean said, his deep voice carrying easily over the soft classical music. "It is a genuine pleasure to see you outside of a boardroom. We missed your insights at the Federal Compliance Summit last month." He then turned slightly, addressing the small circle of wealthy investors who had been lingering near him. "If any of you ever find your supply chain payment systems completely collapsing, this is the exact woman you call. 2 years ago, Zara surgically dismantled a catastrophic internal audit failure for a massive logistics firm I advise. She saved them tens of millions of dollars over a single weekend. Absolute, undeniable brilliance. The effect was immediate and electric. The polite, superficial chatter in our immediate vicinity ceased entirely. The phrase tens of millions acted like a powerful gravitational pull. The venture capitalists and private equity partners turned their heads, suddenly looking at my plain wool coat with intense, calculated interest. Grant practically materialized out of thin air, a sheen of desperate sweat forming along his hairline. He shoved his way into the circle, inserting himself directly between me and Dean. He let out a loud, booming laugh that sounded completely hollow, vibrating with panic. "Ah, Dean, you are far too kind," Grant said, clapping the bank director on the shoulder with forced, desperate familiarity. "You know my little sister. Zara is actually going through a bit of a rough patch right now, a very difficult transition phase. Elise and I are just doing our absolute best to keep her afloat and provide a stable family environment for her during a tough time." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the lie hung in the air. He was standing inside a building that my money had insured, feeding guests with food secured by my credit, and he was publicly painting me as his pathetic charity case to save his own fragile ego. I did not scream. I did not blush or defend myself. I calmly stepped forward and placed the 2 brown paper packages onto a nearby silver console table. I looked directly into my brother's eyes. My voice was quiet, steady, and razor-sharp. "Are you absolutely sure you want to continue this specific narrative right here, Grant?" The quiet challenge terrified him. When a manipulator is cornered in public, they rarely retreat. They double down on the delusion. Grant turned back to Dean, tapping his own temple with a patronizing, sorrowful smile. "Zara gets a little confused when she is under stress," he explained, projecting his voice so the surrounding investors could clearly hear the gaslighting. "She works a very simple, isolated desk job from her house. The complexities of high-level corporate finance and venue management are just a bit over her head. We try not to overwhelm her with the actual numbers." Dean Holloway's polite smile vanished instantly. A deep, heavy furrow appeared between his brows. He looked from Grant, who was sweating profusely and grinning like a manic salesman, back to me, perfectly calm and perfectly still. Dean was not a fool. He was a veteran risk manager. He knew my exact resume. He knew my advisory firm. He knew I was a senior forensic auditor who tore apart complex financial structures for a living. The atmosphere in the room violently shifted. The warm, social glow evaporated, replaced rapidly by the cold, sterile light of corporate suspicion. I made my final decision. I was not leaving this party. I reached into the deep pocket of my coat and pulled out my mobile phone. I unlocked the screen and opened the secure file directory containing the evidence I had prepared. "Grant," I said, my voice cutting through the lingering silence like a scalpel, "if you are actively using my name, my professional credentials, and my forged signature to build trust in this room, I am afraid I need to officially correct the record." Grant opened his mouth, his face turning a sickly, ashen shade of gray, but he never got the chance to speak a single word. A sharp, distinct vibration cut through the tense air. It was not my phone. It was Dean Holloway's device. The bank director slowly pulled the phone from the inner pocket of his bespoke jacket. He glanced down at the glowing screen. A new, high-priority email had just bypassed his assistant and landed directly in his private executive inbox. I knew exactly who the sender was. I had sent a one-word text message to Tessa the exact second Grant tried to block the front door. Dean adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the bright screen. The string quartet seemed to fade into nothingness. When Dean finally looked up, his gaze was utterly devoid of warmth, fixed entirely on my brother. He read the subject line of the email aloud, his voice dropping like an anvil in the center of the silent foyer. "This is a formal legal notice from the offices of Tessa Rowe, attorney at law." Dean read slowly, articulating every single syllable. Subject: immediate revocation of financial backing, declaration of forgery, and cease and desist regarding Zara Barnes. Dean scrolled through the text of the email on his glowing screen. When he finally looked up, his expression had hardened into cold, institutional granite. He did not yell, but his voice commanded the absolute attention of everyone standing in the grand foyer. "This legal notice explicitly states that you have never consented to act as a financial guarantor for this venue, and that the signature on the comfort letter submitted to my underwriting team is entirely fraudulent." Grant let out a high, strained laugh, frantically wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Dean, please. This is just a massive paperwork misunderstanding. My sister is just getting her wires crossed regarding some old family trusts. It is a clerical error. We can clear this up over a drink." I stayed composed, then looked around the room and met the eyes of the investors now listening to every word. "There is absolutely no misunderstanding," I said, my voice perfectly clear and carrying effortlessly across the heated marble floors. "For the past 3 years, I have secretly funded the operational backbone of this business. I paid your commercial liability insurance. I funded your payroll contingency accounts. I paid for the software that organized this very party. 3 days ago, you called me to uninvite me from this event because my appearance was not wealthy enough for your aesthetic." I paused, letting the heavy silence ring out. "You called me a loser, Grant, but every single thing in this room is standing on the bills I paid." At that exact moment, the heavy mahogany doors leading to the service hallway swung open. The operations manager of Aurelian House walked out, his face pale and tense. He approached Grant, keeping his voice low, but in the dead silence of the foyer, his words carried perfectly to the surrounding guests. "Mr. Barnes, I am incredibly sorry to interrupt, but the final payment gateway for the bar service and the temporary event insurance has officially timed out and declined. The grace period expired at 8 o'clock tonight. According to our strict vendor contracts, we are legally required to suspend all alcohol service immediately. The collapse of a fake empire does not happen with a cinematic explosion. It happens with a devastating, humiliating whimper." Across the room, the bartenders in their crisp white jackets immediately began placing silver caps back onto the expensive liquor bottles. The live string quartet, sensing the massive shift in the atmosphere, awkwardly lowered their bows, letting the final note die out into a suffocating quiet. Guests slowly lowered their crystal flutes to the nearest tables. Before Grant could even formulate a lie to explain the bar closing, a woman holding a digital tablet pushed her way through the crowd. She was the lead representative for the imported floral vendor. "Elise," the vendor said, her tone completely devoid of customer service politeness, "the backup virtual credit card you gave us just came back completely locked due to reported fraud. I need a signed, legally binding payment commitment tonight, or my crew is coming in to dismantle these floral arches right now." Elise completely lost her composure. Her flawless, strained smile shattered into a million pieces. She let out a panicked, breathless sob, frantically looking around at the wealthy socialites who were now staring at her with unabashed pity and deep discomfort. The illusion was entirely dead. Dean Holloway adjusted his bespoke suit jacket and let out a long, heavy sigh. He looked at Grant with the sheer professional disdain of a man who had almost been conned into a terrible investment. "Grant, Crown Meridian Bank operates on absolute transparency," Dean stated firmly. "When there are clear signs of gross financial misrepresentation, combined with an obvious inability to manage basic operational cash flow, we cannot continue any discussions. I highly suggest you consult your legal counsel regarding the forged documents you submitted to my office." Dean gave me a brief, respectful nod, turned on his heel, and walked out the front door. like water draining from a cracked basin. The elite guests immediately followed suit. Venture capitalists and angel investors murmured quiet excuses, avoiding eye contact with my brother as they quickly retrieved their coats from the panicked valet staff. Grant stood alone in the center of his crumbling ballroom. He turned to me, his eyes wide with desperate rage. "You ruined everything," he hissed bitterly. "You destroyed my life." I looked at him with absolute, unshakable calm. "No, Grant, I just stopped being the backdrop for a play that is way past due." I left before he could answer. I had no interest in watching the rest of the collapse. I turned my back on the manufactured luxury, leaving the two simple brown packages on the silver table for my niece and nephew. I walked out into the freezing, crisp night air, my posture straight and my conscience completely clear. The battle was officially over. Resolved cleanly on Christmas Eve, exactly as I had planned. Spring arrived a few months later, bringing with it a quiet, undeniable peace. The fallout from that night was swift and brutal. Facing massive debt and the very real threat of bank fraud investigations, Grant was forced to sell his operating rights to Aurelian House for pennies on the dollar to avoid complete bankruptcy. He currently works a standard, 40-hour-a-week job, managing logistics for a mid-sized supply firm. There are no more custom suits. There are no more curated networking salons. I maintain a firm, incredibly strict distance from him and Elise. I do not answer their passive-aggressive emails, and I do not attend their tense household dinners. However, my relationship with my niece and nephew remains entirely intact, every second Sunday of the month. I pick Noah and Ivy up in my reliable sedan. We go to our favorite local pancake house. We talk about robotics and ballet, and we laugh until our sides hurt. They are safe, they are loved, and they are completely separated from the financial wreckage of their parents. As for me, I am sitting in the living room of my own quiet, modest townhouse. The mortgage is completely paid off. The emergency fund is full. I take a sip of my chamomile tea, enjoying the absolute, pristine silence of my home. For the first time in my entire adult life, I finally realize that I do not have to pay a single cent to be considered family. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please leave a comment below so we can interact and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and support me even more by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by many more people.